The Paracave Podcast, proudly brought to you by major sponsor Jack's Pale Ale, exclusively available at Parramatta Leagues Club, Shannon Cooney from Glenmore Park Realty, BTZD Clothing, and the official media partner of the Paracave Podcast, the Parramatta Times.
Welcome to another episode of the Paracave Podcast. And now over to your host, Troy Warner, broadcasting live from the world-famous Paracave.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. And look, on the back of the chat I had with the Duckman on Pulse FM, 89.9 FM the other night, where we did a Indigenous All Stars team and a NRL All-Stars team with a few criterias, I thought I would go a little bit more sort of in depth with the teams that I picked on that Sunday night. So look, I'm going to start with, this podcast will be about the Indigenous All-Stars team that I picked. Now, as I said, there was a few criterias, and the criterias were players that have played from 1986 to 2010, and in each team you could only have one player from each club or from a club, but the only exemption would be that you could have the captain. He could be from a club that has already been named as from one of the players that's already in the team. So, for example, you could have two Brisbane players in that Indigenous All-Stars team, and one of them would be the captain of the team, which is what I have done, which we'll go through a little bit later. So anyway, going to start with the fullback, and I chose Matt Bowen from the North Queensland Cowboys. Now, he was a great player in the NRL, played 270 games in the NRL, also had a career over in England as well with Wigan, and also represented Queensland and Australia as well. He played for played for Australia on 2 occasions, and also represented the Queensland Maroons on 10 occasions, and the Indigenous team as well in 2011 and 12. Now, Matty was a great player. He had a great combination with Jonathan Thurston. They scored many a try in the Cowboys games together. And look, origin moment that probably me being a New South Wales supporter probably didn't like was that intercept he took off Brett Kamuli in the State of Origin game up there in Queensland at Suncorp Stadium. Ran towards the try line, put his hand up in the air, and sunk New South Wales hearts that night. But a great player, played in the 2005 loss to the Tigers, the West Tigers, in the grand final. And look, he was a bit out of favour at the end for the Queensland Maroons after the opening match of the 2006 series. So a little bit disappointing there. But look, a great player, scored 130 tries in the NRL, and some of those were very electrifying, that's for sure. Also kicked 36 goals as well. Not many people would probably know Matt Bowen as a bit of a goal kicker, but yeah, certainly kicked 36 goals in his career in the NRL as well, and also over in the Super League as well for Wigan. Now, one of the wingers I've picked is Dale Shearer. Now, Dale Shearer, legend for Queensland Rugby League especially, won a premiership at Manly in 1987. He played for a few clubs. He played for Manly, Brisbane, Gold Coast, South Queensland Crushers, Sydney City, and the North Queensland Cowboys as well. He played for Australia on 21 occasions, including the 1986 and 1990 Kangaroo Tours. So great effort there. Two Kangaroo Tours. Not many players have done two Kangaroo Tours. And I also represented the rest of the world as well, so a little bit of a concept that was around in the time. In this one was in 1988, where the rest of the world took on Great Britain. So you had players for the rest of the world like Steve Ella, Alan Langer, Kurt Sorensen from New Zealand. Mark Graham was a captain on that night from New Zealand. So most of the players were New Zealanders and Australians, a couple of Papua New Guinean players as well, and a French player as well. But they took on the English team, who were out here in 1988 touring Australia, playing Australia as well in Test matches. But back to Dale Shearer, a legend of Queensland. A lot of Queensland highlights from over the years feature Dale scoring tries, 26 appearances for the Maroons, and I do believe that he has played in every position in the back line for Queensland, so 1 through to 7. So I think he has done that. I think I remember hearing a podcast where he had played every position in the back line for Queensland. So I don't think there's any other player that's ever done that, but certainly a great player. Also a goal kicker as well. Kicked 73 goals during his time. I think a bit of a toe poker as well as a goal kicker, but yeah, won a premiership with Manly in 1987 and pretty much a Queensland stalwart as well from those early years. My other winger, I'll do the other winger now, was Wendell Saylor. Big Wendell from the Brisbane Broncos. Also had some time at the St George Illawarra Dragons in rugby league. He's a dual international, played for Australia in rugby union as well for the Wallabies, but it was the NRL where he made his mark in the game, mostly at Brisbane. Played 222 games in total, 127 tries, 1 goal in the NRL. So I'm going to have to ask him about that one if I ever get him on the podcast. So a shout out to Wendell on the podcast. Shout out. I hope I can get him to interview him one day. I'm just looking up where he kicked the goal to see if he remembers. It was a loss against Canberra. So Brisbane versus Canberra. Scored a try that day as well. This was up at ANZ Stadium at the time, what they call it, in Brisbane. And he kicked a goal and scored a try. So I wonder if that was 2001. So maybe that was his swan song from rugby league the first time, possibly. I'm not too sure, but maybe it was right in front. Maybe Wendell will say it was from the sideline. But 1 goal in his career. But big Wendell, he formed a great combination with Lottie Takiri up there in Brisbane on the wings, won premierships. He basically sort of came through the Brisbane ranks after Michael Hancock and Willie Kahn as well. And he's from North Queensland. And look, he sort of made his mark there in the 1994 season. I think I remember by memory, I remember watching his first ever, or one of his first ever games in rugby league. 1993, he made his debut, and I think I'm looking here. I think it was his third game. He scored a try. Yeah, it was against Penrith, at Penrith. It was a Saturday night, and I just remember this young bloke, Wendell. He had hair back in those days. Sorry, Wendell. But I remember him playing for the Brisbane Broncos that night. As a rugby league fan, I used to go down to Penrith Park and watch games of rugby league. So I remember watching that game, and I remember watching Wendell out there on the wing, and he was a little bit of a excitement machine back then, and certainly was during his career. Queensland, he played 14 games for them. Also played in the original All Stars game for the Indigenous team as well. I think he scored the first try in that concept, and representing his culture, his people, he grabbed the corner post and started playing it as a didgeridoo. So a great little memory there as well. So great player, Wendell, and if you want to hear more of his stories, as I said, hopefully I can get him on the podcast one day for a chat, but he's also on Triple M radio these days on the rush hour in the afternoons on Triple M 104.9 FM 4 till 6, so he's got some stories there as well during the days. So, and probably after, I guess you could say, maybe Eric Grothe Sr., maybe the start of the big sort of wingers in the game that we saw, as I said, with Lottie Dakiri as well, so up there in Brisbane. So great player, Wendell. Great. He's a very lovable character of rugby league as well, and as I said, a dual international. Now we'll go to the centres now, and look, I've chosen Mal Meninga, and now what a player Mal was, and certainly still involved in rugby league these days as the Australian Kangaroos coach as well. So also coached Queensland as well during that amazing run that they had starting in 2006. Now Mal's career, well, wow, what a career. 4 kangaroo tours, absolutely amazing. Will never be repeated as ever again, because we simply don't have those kangaroo tours in those, which included 2 undefeated tours, 82-86. He was captain in 1990 and 1994. Won premierships with Canberra, played in the first ever Canberra Grand Final, and also was captain of the Queensland Canberra for their first ever premiership victory. So they great player Mal, one that many people hated to tackle because of his big thighs, and he used to get that sort of hip bump off. He had troubles, I guess, early on in his rugby league career in the New South Wales Rugby League, as it was called then, with broken arms. There was a terrible accident with the goalposts at one game against Manly at the old Seaford Oval, which I think was Canberra's home ground, and it was a wet day, and I think Mal slid off a tackle, and his arm caught the goalpost and was broken. And I think he had a few troubles since that day, and I used to remember seeing him with a big arm guard on his arm in protection when he came back to play rugby league. So, but a great player, Mal, for Canberra. Before Canberra, he played 166 games, 74 tries. Bit of a toe poker goal kicker, 283 goals, 61% career strike rate. But before that, he was also a champion player up in the Queensland competition as well. Also did a year over in St Helens, the St Helens Saints over in England as well. 31 appearances, 28 tries in 31 games. That's amazing. And one of these Australian players that is pretty much, I guess, He's a legend of that club, even though he spent 1 year over there, 31 appearances. He is a legend of that club. I've heard Blocker Roach say the story about I think it was the 1986 or 1990 tour, Kangaroo Tour, and the Australian Kangaroos were playing St Helens in a tour game, and the Kangaroos bus was pulling up to the ground, and there was just like, he said there was like 5,000 people there. It was unbelievable. Apparently the crowd there, and they were just all there to see Mal Meninga because they just fell in love with him so much. So pretty much a champion player over there as well, and very much loved over there. Coaching wise, he coached Queensland, as I said, in that state of origin reign from about 2006 it was, and for those 8 series in a row victories, unbelievable. One of the greatest rugby league teams you will see in rugby league history, and currently coaching the Australian Kangaroos, who are now world champions, having won the last World Cup against Samoa in the final. So, you know, one is an immortal of rugby league as well. So, I think one of the last immortals to be named, I think the 13th. So, a champion player. Would love to get Mal Meninga onto the podcast. Speaking of getting onto the podcast, one player that I did choose in the other centre position was Steve the Zip Zip Man Ella. Now, obviously, Parramatta player, had the privilege of speaking to him on the podcast a few years ago, I think it was now. We do keep in regular contact when we see each other at games and the like. But a champion player, the Zip Zip, had a struggle with injury a lot of the time as well during his career, so he probably didn't play as many games as he wanted to. 157 games, was also a goal kicker as well, 104 goals, 93 tries, won 4 premierships with the Parramatta Eels, as well as representing New South Wales in State of Origin, and also Australia as well. Went on the 1982 Kangaroo Tour to England as well. And look, he's a great player. As I mentioned before, played in that Rest of the World game as well in 1988. 5 test appearances for the Kangaroos, and a game against Wales he scored 4 tries, so that was his Kangaroo debut, and 4 tries in a game against Wales. That's unbelievable. But yeah, look, a great player, and his combination with Mick Cronin in the centres there for Parramatta was a great thing for them. Also played 5'8", also played a little bit of fullback as well at times. But yeah, champion bloke, a champion player. He's the cousin of the famous Ella brothers, so in rugby union. And he talks about that in the podcast chat I had with him as well. Retired in 1989 after missing many months through injury. So, as I said, had a lot of injuries during his career, but when he was on the field, a great player, and one who certainly has one of the greatest nicknames, I think, in rugby league history, the Zip Zip Man. So that was the Parramatta player that I chose in the Indigenous All Stars team. Now the halves, and the halves are 2 players that I've had on the podcast, and one just recently, talking about the Indigenous players that he played with and also played against, and they gave me a little bit of a preview of the All-Stars game, and that is Mr. Andrew Walker. Now, Mr. Andrew Walker, he is one of these players that people have said he's one of the most gifted players to play rugby league. Some of the skills he had was absolutely unbelievable. Actually, he started off playing rugby union, and then he switched codes and played at the St George Dragons, as they were called back then. He is the first Indigenous player to represent Australia in rugby league and rugby union, having represented Australia in 1996 against PNG, and also representing the Wallabies as well in many a test match. Also represented New South Wales City as well. Played for the St George Dragons, the Sydney City Roosters as they were called, and after his Wallaby stint he had a season at Manly as well. But a great Indigenous player, and one that Phil Gould said he was one of the most talented, unique players that he has coached, and just had that, ability to get a try out of nothing with either a great pass or a chip kick for a try, but just had that natural ability. And he's been giving me his time on the podcast recently, and I really appreciate that, and hopefully we're going to catch up as well and have more chats as well. So he just loves the game of rugby league. So he was my 5'8". Now, my halfback was another player that was on the podcast as well. He played for Illawarra, Sydney City, the Parramatta Eels, the Auckland Warriors as they were called in that time, and then the West Tigers, and that is John Simon. So started off his career at Illawarra and ran them around the park. He was pretty much the general at halfback there. Got Illawarra to their first ever semi-final series as well. He played... he played 230 games in the NRL, 50 tries, was a goal kicker as well, 118 goals. Played for a few clubs. Actually played for a Aboriginal team in 1999, so a little bit of a concept. They played the PNG side and kicked 2 goals. He was the halfback. It was played at Campbelltown, I should say, sorry. And look, I guess this could have been probably the first sort of Aboriginal team we saw get put together in 1999, but some of the other players he played with was Owen Craigie, Albert Torrens, Kevin McGuinness, Cliff Lyons was the 5'8" that day, Dennis Moran, who I've had on the podcast, the late Carl Webb was also played in that game, Big Mark Tukey played in that game and was coached by Arthur Beetson. So actually he made a appearance for them as well. Also represented Australia as well against the rest of the world in 1997, and also played State of Origin as well for New South Wales, 4 games for them. So a great player. Probably he didn't really, I guess, achieve what he really wanted to in winning a competition. Had a few opportunities making semi-final series, but didn't win a competition, but still had a great career. Made, as I said, State of Origin and played for Australia as well. So, and good enough also too to give me his time on the podcast as well. So thank you very much, John, for that. Check that one out in the back catalogue if you haven't already heard that one. Okay, let's move into the forward pack, and let's start with the engine room guys, you could say, the front row forwards, and we'll start off with George Rose. Now, I selected him from the Melbourne side for when he played there. He also played for the Sydney Roosters, made a name for himself at the Manly Sea Eagles and also played for the St George Illawarra Dragons. And these days is a massive boxing promoter with No Limit Boxing, so looking after the likes of Tim Zhu, Nikita Zhu and the like. So what a world he's living in now, I guess you could say, going from rugby league to boxing, but I guess he has always loved the world of boxing, so that's why he's probably into it now. But his rugby league career was, as I said, he played 151 games, scoring 10 tries, and played for those clubs that I said. Also made 5 All Stars appearances for the Indigenous All Stars, played in the original one in 2010 up there at the Gold Coast at what was called Skilled Park, and the Indigenous All Stars got the win that night as well, 16 points to 12. So George played in that game, so pretty good honour there to play in the first ever All Stars game. Also played for Australia for the PM's 13 and also won comps with Manly as well. So look, a great player. He was a bit of a cult hero, probably still is a little bit now. I'm sure he probably might not like me saying this, or he might not mind it, but was on the bigger side of a front rower, I guess you could say. But hey, certainly really got his job done, that's for sure. And I certainly wouldn't want to be on the other end trying to tackle Big George, but a lovable character even now in his boxing world, but a very proud Indigenous man. And I think also too, playing still rugby league, can you believe it, in the Koori knockout as well, I think, for Walgett, I think it was last time. And still got a little bit of a run around there. So that was great to see that he's still pulling on the boots and giving it a game of rugby league at the ripe old age of 40. So great to see George play those games. But yeah, great career as well. Played in that Battle of Brookvale game as well, that famous one. But doing great things in the boxing space now. Now his front row forward partner was a player that I watched grow up whilst I was growing up watching rugby league, and that is Craig Salvatore. Now, that's a bit of a name from a blast from the past, but Craig played for the Eastern Suburbs Roosters, as they are known, in the NSWRL back in the day, and then they became the Sydney City Roosters, and also had a season at the arch enemy, the South Sydney Rabbitohs as well. So going from the Roosters to the Rabbitohs, a few players have done that in their time. Craig Wing comes to mind straight away. I think Michael Crocker has done it, but there's been plenty who have done that change, and Craig is one of those as well. Played State of Origin for New South Wales on 5 occasions. Played in the old City vs Country format game that we used to have, which used to be a little bit of a State of Origin trial game, I guess you could call it. But played in that game. He played for City in those games, so represented that on 4 occasions, State of Origin 5 occasions, also represented Australia as well. And look, a great player, a bit of a goal kicker as well, at times you could see, and not really noted for his goal kicking, but he could if he was called upon. And represented New South Wales between 1991 and 1993, so had a pretty good time there. I think winning the series in 92, obviously that's the famous game with that's 1991. He played in Game 3 in that series, that famous series with Mark Geyer in Game 2, but Craig came into this team in Game 3. So 92, 93, 94, I think were pretty much dominant series wins for New South Wales. So it was part of a successful period for New South Wales Rugby League in Origin in that time. But a great club, man, and played most of his career at the Roosters. Started in 1986 and finished in 1996 at the Rabbitohs. So a good 10-year career there as well. So look, he was pretty strong, skillful, had a bit of an offload in him, a great club man. Players wanted to play with him, and look, even the fans, they still love him to this day. My hooker for this game, this All Stars team, I should say anyway, is Mal Cochrane. Now, maybe not many people know who Mal is, but certainly the Manly fans would know who he is, because that was a team that he played for. 116 appearances, 19 tries, and he was a goal kicker as well. I think a toe poker as well. I think that was the norm back in his day in the 80s and early 90s. Represented New South Wales country as well on one occasion. Won a grand final with Manly. Won a grand final with Manly in 1987. There was an old award that you could win as Player of the Year, and that was the Best and Fairest award, and that was the Rothmans Medal. He won that in 1986. And later, after that grand final win in 1987, had a few injuries, and then returned back to Young to give back to bush footy and became the captain coach of Young. So also did some time on the NRL judiciary as well as a panel member as well, overseeing some cases as well. But one of the first sort of Indigenous players that I remember playing, obviously Cliff Lyons as well at that time was playing with Mal in that Manly side and won that competition as well together. So that's who I've chosen as the hooker for this side. The second row, I've gone for one player who I wish I would have had at Parramatta. Just growing up, I just loved the way he played. He played the game hard, tough, wore headgear. He played for the Eastern Suburbs Roosters, went over to Manly, and like Mel, he won a competition there in 1987. Then moved to the Gold Coast and finished off his career at Western Suburbs. And that player is Ron Gibbs. Now, his nickname is Rambo. Ron Rambo Gibbs. And look, he, as I said, he would have been one of the players I'd like to see, or would have liked to have seen play at Parramatta, because I just loved the way he played. He was tough. He tackled hard. He ran hard, and just was one of those players that never took a back step, and certainly was not scared of any opposition. So probably opposition players he probably didn't make that many tackles in the game, because players probably ran away from him to try and avoid running into him, because he could certainly pull off a big hit here and there. Represented New South Wales country on a couple of occasions as well, but as I said, probably his major highlight in his career, if you ask him, would be that 1987 grand final victory. And also played in the loss to the Wigan Warriors in the World Club Challenge the following year. So, a great player, and look, equally a great player and a tougher player, and a player that players wouldn't want to run at in fear of getting tackled by, was the other second rower and who I've put in as captain of this team, and that's Gordon Tallis. And having Wendell Saylor from Brisbane already, I've picked Gordon Tallis in the second row. So I used my exemption for him to get him in this side. So a very proud Indigenous man. And look, what a career. And is still going in rugby league, still involved in rugby league. Obviously on Fox League as a commentator. I guess you could call it sort of a reviewer of games, a commentator on games. Doesn't necessarily commentate on the actual games, but you'll see him pre-game, half-time, after the game as well. And you will see him on the Matty Johns show as well. So that's the way he's still involved in the game. As a member of the National Rugby League Hall of Fame, Dally M second rower of the year in 1999, also won the prestigious Clive Churchill Medal in the 1998 Grand Final, which Brisbane won. 214 games he's played for his beloved Queensland Maroons 17 times. And also represented Australia in 16 games, both Super League and for the Kangaroos. And speaking of the Kangaroos, won a World Cup with them, and also had the prestigious, I guess, title of being a captain in that game against Russia, which resulted in a 110-4 victory for the Kangaroos as well. So a pretty prestigious honour for Gordon to captain Australia as well. He was captain of Queensland as well in State of Origin as well from 2001. And look, he made headlines, I guess, early on in his career, where he sat a year out with a bit of a contract dispute as well between the Dragons and the Broncos, and the Super League time as well. So sat out a year, so would have played more games, but yeah, great player, and as I said, one of the ones that you would not want to run into. There's unfortunately the highlights, I guess you could say, of his fisticuffs with Ben Ross at Penrith Stadium one game. He's got the highlights in State of Origin of him ragdolling Brett Hodgson over the sideline, and also the infamous night where he got sent off with Bill Harrigan sending him off in a State of Origin game as well. So a very colourful character in the game of rugby league. He's played the game hard, played the game tough, and certainly a great player in rugby league. As I said, a Hall of Fame member. So great player, Gordon. Now, some people loved him, others didn't like him as well, the way he played. Gordon Tallis, the player. Look, I was probably one of those that didn't like him as a player, but I guess I've sort of changed around, and probably I don't mind him as a commentator now. So it's a little bit strange sometimes how you may not like a player on the field because of the way that they played, or they used to play in a team that used to always beat your team, but when they retire and they get into the media and you hear them all the time and you see them on TV all the time and you hear them analyse the game, well then your mind changes. And I guess that's probably been a bit like for me as well I mean, I liked the way that he played the game tough, but I just didn't like him as a player, if you know what I mean. But these days, I don't mind watching him on the Matty John show and also listening to him as a commentator. He's also on Triple M radio as well as a commentator as well. So he's got some great stories there, and he knows the game of rugby league pretty well. So it's strange how that happens, but a great player, Gordon. Hoping I can get him on the podcast as well. That'd be great one day. The lock forward, I've put Greg Bird at the lock forward position. 235 games in the NRL. Also played 74 over in the Super League as well. So over 300 games, easy. Played for New South Wales 18 times, Australia 17 times, World Cup winner, State of Origin series winner as well, helped break that run of Queensland in 2014, which I think he said on the podcast was a State of Origin highlight for him. But yeah, another tough player. Early on in his career, probably had a few dramas, being suspended and the like, but certainly as he matured as a player, was certainly a tough player, a creative player as well, had an offload in him, could tackle as well, and one of these players that just you wouldn't want to run at because he could tackle. Started off his career at the Cronulla Sharks, and then finished his NRL career up at the Gold Coast Titans as well, where he was captain up there as well, and then also had a couple of stints at the Catalan Dragons over there in the English Super League, playing 83 games for them. So 2009 had a year, and then 2017, 18, 19 had a year, and just recently I've seen him play in the Nines Premier League, a little tournament that was held on Australia Day, and he's playing in some of these Legends games that you see online as well. So still playing rugby league, and I do believe could be still involved in Queensland Cup team up there as well, coaching as well, and I believe he may be coaching himself as well. So we wish him all the best as well up there. And I guess it's funny being a New South Welshman and probably disliking them on the field, but now living up in Queensland. But Greg has obviously given me his time before, so I really appreciate that coming on the podcast. He's done a State of Origin preview before and also a chat about his career, so hopefully I can get him on the podcast again this year to talk Origin. I know just how much he loves the State of Origin time of year. Also played for the Indigenous All Stars as well on 5 occasions. So and played in that inaugural game in 2010. So a proud Indigenous man who has represented them as well. So a great honour for him. But a very gutsy, crafty, tough player, probably a player that you'd love to have on your side rather than against you. So he was my lock forward. Now 4 players on the bench, starting with the creator of that Indigenous All Stars concept, or the All Stars concept, I guess you could say, Preston Campbell. Now, what a player Preston was. Dally M Player of the Year in 2001, Dally M Halfback of the Year 2001, won a premiership with Penrith, started off his career at the Gold Coast Chargers before coming down to New South Wales to link up with the Sharks, and then went to the Panthers, and his first year at the Panthers won a premiership in 2003, and then played in the first ever Gold Coast Titans team as well, where he finished off his career in 2011 and played in that first Indigenous All Stars game, or NRL All Stars game, for the Indigenous side, and he was fullback at the time. Now, only a small guy, Preston, but a lot of heart and a lot of speed. Scored some great tries, 267 appearances in the NRL, 86 tries, was a goal kicker as well. Pretty handy. 279 goals, kicked a one field goal as well. So, yeah, pretty handy player to have in your side. Could play fullback, could play halfback, could play 5'8", could play hooker if you needed to as well. Probably every position in the spine. So, a great player in rugby league, and one that we love watching, and we are thankful that he came up with that All-Stars concept. And now we see Jaden Campbell running around for the Gold Coast Titans, so it must be pretty special for Preston to see his son run around in the same jersey that he ran around in at the Gold Coast. So we wish Jaden all the best for 2024, and yeah, thank you, Preston, for coming up for that All-Stars concept. We really appreciate it, and we love seeing it every year, because it's a gentle reminder that it is the first sort of official, I guess you could say, game of rugby league for the year. So thank you for coming up with that idea. It's a great concept, and it's just getting bigger and bigger every year, and it's one that the players love playing in, representing their cultures. The next player on the reserves bench is probably someone who probably not a lot of people know about, but Jeff Hardy. Now, Jeff played at Illawarra, started off his career there, and then moved to the St George Dragons, where he was probably better known there at the St George Dragons, as they were called then before their merger, and played in the 2 grand finals for the Dragons, and 2 losses, unfortunately, for the Dragons against the Broncos in 92-93. But played 249 games, scoring 35 tries in the NRL, or the NSWRL, ARL, and then eventually the NRL, as it was called. But I'll just keep it simple, call it the NRL. So 249 games. Also had a career over in England as well, for Sheffield, Castleford and Huddersfield. So a great little career there. Another 123 games from 1989 to 2000. So spread amongst his NRL career there. So look, a great player. It was a St George junior. Played mostly back row in the teams that he played, and he was one of those players that everyone loved to have in your side. Really, really tried hard, and look, I think he started on the bench for the Premiership decider in 92, and then he was probably... Brian Smith had him on there, and he came on earlier than expected in the 93 grand final after that injury to Jason Stevens as well, that terrible injury. But it was a bit of an interchange forward as well. And also, as well, like Mal Cochran did some time on the NRL Judiciary panel as well. So, and like a guest a couple of weeks ago, Darryl Williams, he was on the Judiciary panel as well. So, look, a great player, and I think one that was who Andrew Walker talked about was in what they had at the Dragons called Koori Corner. So I think Ricky Walford himself, Andrew Walker, and a couple other players as well. They had their little Kuri corner, what they used to call it, and one that the Indigenous players really loved having in their side. The next player, now these two players that take up the rest of the bench, they started their careers in 2010, so they just scraped into the criteria. The first one is Ryan James, who played 4 games for the Gold Coast Titans in 2010, but went on to play NRL until 2022. Represented the Gold Coast Titans, the Canberra Raiders, also the Canterbury Bulldogs and the Brisbane Broncos as well, where I think now he is doing some community-based work for them involving rugby league. So, look, a great player, 168 games, 33 tries for the Gold Coast and all those clubs that I mentioned just before. Really made his name at the Gold Coast, spent most of his time there, was captain of that side, represented Australia in the PM's 13 game on 2 occasions, represented the Indigenous All Stars on 7 occasions. Again, something that he would love to play. The last time he played was 2023, so last year he played even though he retired in 2022. So a little bit of a swan song for the Indigenous All Stars, but a proud Indigenous man, and no doubt he would have loved to have played in that game. And look, just tried hard, played hard, front rower, had a bit of an offload in him, could tackle, spent a lot of time in one season, I think it was, with injury. So that was no, I think it was a knee injury as well. I think it was at the time an ACL injury. But if you'd like to know more, great podcast, the Keegan Hipgrave podcast. He did one with him a few months ago now, so check that one out, Keegan and Co, and you'll be able to listen to Ryan James on there. Hopefully I can get him on this podcast as well. But yeah, great player and a great conversation there. The other representative on the bench who also started his career in 2010 is Andrew Fafita. Now, at the time I put him down as a West Tigers player because he actually started his career there in 2010 and then moved to the Cronulla Sharks in 2012 and played till 2022. Played 251 games in the NRL, 40 tries, and one of the most memorable tries was that grand final try against Melbourne in 2016, where he just barged himself over the line and got the ball over the line underneath the posts and was basically the match-winning try for them. So that was probably his favourite try, no doubt, when Cronulla won their first ever premiership, and he was a big reason why they won that game. Was pretty destructive in that season as well. One of the game's best props in the NRL at that time. So represented New South Wales on 10 occasions. Also represented Australia on 7 occasions, and also Tonga as well on 8 occasions, and a Tonga invitational side as well. So I guess you could say a dual international, well, not a dual international, but played for 2 countries, Tonga and Australia, having heritage in both of those. Was involved in that great game against Australia, the 2017 World Cup. He played for Tonga and that was over in England, I think it was. Won a World Cup for Australia in 2013. As I said, big man, had a Arthur Beetson-like offload at times, and as I said, was one of the game's best props. Probably later on in his career, probably suffered a few injuries as well that held him back a little bit. There was one injury, I believe it was sort of around the throat area, his larynx area, where it was a terrible injury, but I believe he's overcome that one now. And at the time, we didn't think he'd be playing rugby league again, but he ended up playing again. And I think he's also played in the Koori Knockout as well at the end of the year, the same one that George Rose played in as well, but plays in a few of these Legends games as well around the traps. But yeah, a great player, and just snuck in for a bench spot. So just recapping my Indigenous All Stars team from 1986 to 2010 with the criteria of one player from each club from a club, but the captain is exempt. So just recapping the team, starting at fullback, Matty Bowen from the North Queensland Cowboys, Dale Shearer from the South Queensland Crushers, Mal Meninga from the Canberra Raiders, Steve Ella from the Parramatta Eels, Wendell Saylor from the Brisbane Broncos, Andrew Walker from the St George Dragons, John Simon from the New Auckland Warriors, George Rose from the Melbourne Storm, Mal Cochran from the Manly Sea Eagles, Craig Salvatore from the Roosters, Gordon Tallis as my captain, so he is the exemption from the Brisbane Broncos, Ron Gibbs from the Gold Coast Giants, Greg Bird, Cronulla Sharks, Preston Campbell, Penrith Panthers, Jeff Hardy, Illawarra, Ryan James, Canterbury Bulldogs, Andrew Fafita, West Tigers. Now, some players may have played a longer career at a club, but they also represented the other clubs, so that's why you might see players like Ryan James for Canterbury, George Rose for Melbourne, John Simon for the Warriors, and the like. So Dale Shearer from the South Queensland Crushers as well. So that's why they've been named from those clubs. So I hope and my coach for the team is Laurie Daly as well. So I hope you've enjoyed that little explanation of my team from the Pulse FM 89.9 FM chat. And later this week there will be the talk about, I'll go in depth with the little bit of a chat about the All Stars team. I guess you could say the best of the rest, I guess. The All Stars team with the same criteria, 1986 to 2010, one player from each club or from a club that they represented, and the only exemption is one player as captain could have played for the same club as another player. So hope you've enjoyed that. Let me know who you would have picked in that team, either on the post that this comes out on. Just drop a comment, or just send me a message and let me know what you think of that team and how that team would go. Would you make any changes? Would you put anyone else in? Would you have the same team? Let me know. But thank you for listening, and until next time, thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Paracave Podcast. See you next time.